one thing that I could have changed, it would definitely be cutting off social media entirely, not having a contact with anybody, like just go off the grid completely.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Adventurer podcast. I'm John Horsfall, and on this weekly podcast, I talk to adventurers and explorers from around the world who have made remarkable and daring journeys in recent years. But what is left for the modern adventurer in the 21st century? Well, let's find out.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure and great to have you on. And I think what's so interesting about your story, which we're going to jump into, is this sort of big leap of faith that you did and a huge 13-month expedition that you did all around Europe. I always like to start at the beginning and sort of about yourself and how you sort of got into planning this big trip.
Well, so I think every story begins way before the actual, as you call it, expedition. And I'm glad you're calling it an expedition, because having no previous experience, it does validate my journey in my eyes to hear it from another adventurer. So prior to the idea, creating in my head, I was living in the States. And I was studying there. And not to get into too much detail about my situation, but I was kind of forced to stay in the States for the duration of 6 years, which was great in the sense that I have gotten my degree there and I had the opportunity to live there. However, it also meant the sacrifice of staying in one place and not being able to see my family for, nearly 6 years. And so I found myself in this privileged place, of being able to be in the States, of being able to get a degree there. And then I felt trapped. And you bear in mind that it's a sacrifice that I decided to take. It's a sacrifice that was fully my responsibility, but also it doesn't change the fact that I was feeling like I am really not very independent, that I am really very reliant on other people. And at the time, I started to listen to some podcasts. And in the podcasts, I listened to stories of ultra athletes, adventurers, people who were starting their own businesses, people who were just shifting the paradigm, you might call it. And I thought to myself, wow, it would be amazing to do something similar one day, a version of it. And I just felt this thumping feeling in my chest whenever I was listening to the stories, feeling like, well, something's in me, and I contained it, but I knew that it was within me. And so after 6 years, I come back to Poland, and I have this grand meeting to get a visa so that I can go on and work in the States. And, I get all the papers and everything's fine. So I'm thinking it's just, formality. I come in and they say, we can't give you the visa. And I remember being so shocked, because I thought to myself, well, here I was being a really good girl, climbing the ladder. And then here I am on the top of that ladder. I'm looking around and I'm realizing I'm on the wrong wall. And I remember I just felt quiet. I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have an alternative. And I was terrified, And then there was this shower scene. Every dramatic movie has a shower scene, and I definitely had mine, worth of a Hollywood drama. So I'm, sitting in the shower, and at this point I'm reevaluating every decision that I ever took in my life. I was doing this thing, and I thought I was doing the right thing, and all of a sudden I realized that it was all for nothing. And so this question clarifies in my head: what makes you happy? A very simple question. And before I have a chance to actually think about the answer and come up with a good plan for myself. Like an image of a bike comes to my head, you know? And I think it was so shocking to my own self to see an image of a bike. And then, you know, what follows is me fantasizing about like going on a bike trip through Europe, a completely crazy idea that I have never ever thought of before. And you know, I got out of the shower and I started going around telling people, "This is what I'm going to do." And at the time, I got laughed right in my face. People thought I completely lost my shit, and no one believed I was actually going to carry that through. So that's kind of the seed that was planted before I even started the trip, because the shower scene was almost exactly 2 years before I actually started my trip.
It's very interesting. There was a lot of similarities with me as well. This idea of when you have this sort of burning desire, you can almost, like, when you're thinking of it, it excites you so much. You sort of can't breathe. You're sort of can't sleep at night because you're so excited, because it's in your head. You're sort of planning it, but and then what makes you happy was something that I remember when I went across Europe, asking people wherever I went, was like, what makes them happy, and the varied responses that you got. And it's a sort of, you know, what makes you happy? It's a question everyone, you know, should ask from time to time, because it matters so much.
Absolutely.
And so with you know, planning this trip, and as you say, everyone around you sort of laughing and wondering, okay, when's that gonna blow off or grow out of it? How did the sort of planning of that sort of come about? Because, as you say, having never done anything like this, how did it sort of go from the idea to the execution?
I mean, to their credit, the last time I cycled a significant distance, and by significant distance, I mean probably no more than 50K, was about like 15 years before I even came up with the idea, and then I was sore for a week. So I really had absolutely no point of reference for coming up with a plan to cycle through Europe. And laughing didn't really discourage me, but the fact that I was broke did. And so I just realized that if I am to start this journey, I'll probably need a load of financial backup. And so I decided to go to London. You know, not a great place if you're trying to save money. Absolutely not. But that was my choice. And so I found one job, then I found another job. And and I kept thinking about this idea. And, you know, I thought to myself, well, there are so many people who come up with those grand plans, and they just talk about it for years and they never do it, because there's always something that comes in the way. Like, I don't have money, I don't have time, I'll wait for the children to like finish high school, finish university, whatever it is. And I thought, well, I'm different, so I'm definitely going to do it, right? And here I am jumping from a job to another, and then pandemic hits, and I'm still thinking, you know, that I need to reach a certain financial level for me to be able to quit the job and to leave on the trip. But it's one of those things that you can just convince yourself, you know, till eternity, that you just need another month, you know, you just need another week, and you can do it forever. And so for me, I got a little help from the universe, as I call it. And I lost my job. I lost my job at the time. I was in Poland. I was on vacation. And I remember just looking at the message in the grocery line and thinking to myself, wow, like all of my financial security just got out of the window, and I have nothing now. You know, what am I going to do? And I think before I even finished reading the email from work, I already knew that I was going to move out of London, get a bike, get everything else that I need for the trip because I had zero things prepared, and I'm just going to start the trip, you know? So between me losing the job and me jumping on the bike, probably like 2 weeks passed. And again, I was starting from the zero. Like during those 2 years that I've been marinating the idea of the trip in my head, someone had sent me a guidebook on trips done on the bike. And I remember just like, you know, looking through a few pages, taking like very basic notes. And so at the time where I lost my job, I actually had a couple of pages of notes. So I wasn't completely unprepared. I kind of had a very vague idea of what needs to be done. Also, in London, where I was living, I had met a guy who cycled through South America. And I remember talking to him about the idea of the trip. And the one advice that he has given me was don't overthink it, which is definitely like my default to overthink things, overanalyze them. He said, don't overthink it because you're never going to do it. And so I really listened to that advice. You know, I found the bike within the first week. The second week, I ordered everything that I thought I would need for the bike. And then on the day of the departure, I packed all my panniers, and then I had this terrifying moment of realizing how much it actually weighs. And so I had to put like a very good face, like in front of my mom, to pretend that like I got this, like nothing. But on the inside, I was completely terrified. And you know, the first moment that you leave, for me, it's always very difficult to say goodbye to your parents because I knew that was going to be a longer trip. And, you know, it gave me a flashback from the time where I left to the States, where I also said to my mom, I'm going to be gone for 2 years. And she just, you know, waved her hand at me and she said, I ain't going to be back before that. And I was gone for nearly 6 years. So now, you know, here I am standing in front of her and I'm telling her I'll be back in 6 months. And, you know, she bursts in tears. I follow, and we both kind of know, I think, that it's not going to be 6 months. And then I leave, you know, into the unknown.
I think that's such great advice from your friend, is just don't overthink it, because I think we've spoken at length on this podcast about this idea that if you go into every single detail of these sort of trips, everything that can go wrong, any sort of horrendous thing that could happen to you, you would never, ever do it. Whereas if you go in with a slight, I don't know, not naivety, but in a sense of just see what happens, I think it's I want to be careful just in case I might say, but you just want to, you don't, as you say, you just don't want to overthink it. There's so much that can go wrong in everyday life on these adventures, but most of the time it's usually works out all fine, and you sort of just learn and grow as you go along.
Absolutely. But, you know, a disclaimer for me, in my case, it definitely was me being naive and me not preparing anything. I left the first day. I didn't have anything planned. I didn't think about the food. I didn't think about the place for sleeping. I was just going, and I kind of figured that I was going to be able to do things even if I'm not prepared. I had this faith, I think, in what I was doing, because, you know, when I set out, I didn't really know why, but I had this feeling, a very strong feeling, that I needed to go, and I just followed through. But the first days, I kind of had, you know, a general direction in which I wanted to head, but I didn't have any maps prepared. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't organizing every bit of the trip to the little details. I was just going, and I assumed that I was going to encounter some issues because that's just a part of the deal. And when people were asking me about things that happened or things that could happen, or warning me, trying to warn me, I would just say, you know what, if a problem comes up, then I'll deal with it. But I wasn't going to like waste my energy on overthinking too much.
So on that first day leaving your home, what happened at sort of 6 p.m. when you are maybe it's getting dark and you're thinking about food? I always think the first day is probably the most interesting. I always find it is as well.
Oh, I
On
would
my
say that
trips.
my first 3 days were very interesting. And so 6 p.m. is probably a good point because, golden hour, I still have about 2 hours of sun to go. And at this point, it's still fun. I'm still like, oh my God, I'm doing this massive trip. Like, this is the first day. 2 hours later, it becomes less fun because I'm on a really bad road. It's not like my bike is perfect for asphalt, but if you're using any dirt roads, it was just terrible. And so I was on one of those dirt roads, supposedly a shortcut somewhere. And here I am in the middle of nowhere, and just fields and forests around me. And I need to start to think about the food. I had something with me. I didn't leave without any preparation, but I didn't have much. So the first night, I at least didn't have to worry about the food. And I remember I just asked some people about like hostels around the area, or it's not a hostel. What would you call it? Um, it's like this little place run by farmers that they might have a place to stay. It's very popular in Europe, and I go up to this one place within the radius of like 10 or 15 kilometers. And at this point, I'm already over 100K, which I have never done in my life. But I'm still being driven by the excitement of the first day. I'm super tired, but I'm also psyched. And so I asked about this place, and people direct me. They're like, "Oh, you have to go there and there." I arrive, and I'm praying that they have some place to stay. I come and I explain, and like think about how ridiculous it is. Like, here I am on the first day of the trip, and I'm telling them I'm starting this grandiose European expedition, but this is the first day. So they probably just thought I was crazy. They told me that they had no place for me because everything was just, already taken. And I just begged them to let me stay, pitch my tent in the garden. And again, they were looking at me as if I seemed dangerous, or I don't know, there's just something about the way they behaved around me that made me question whether or not I looked like a criminal. But they did let me go in, and they were very helpful. They got me some like extra duvet for the tent, and I even got a shower, and so it was lovely. And I remember staying in the bathroom at night and looking at my skin, and I got a little bit of a glow from the summer day, from riding in the sun. And I remember looking at it and thinking, oh great, I'm gonna get some tan. In the next 2 days, this became unbearable because I did not think that sunscreen would be a good idea. And, by the third day, which is when I met my friend, I had like 3 days to cover over 300 kilometers to see my friend was like leaving the next day. And so I was kind of on a tight schedule the first 3 days, and I'll be spending more than 10 hours on the bike. And I arrived at his place, which happened to be like the highest point of the city. I am so dead that when I took a shower, I was actually sitting down because I didn't have any more juice in me. And all I wanted to do was to lay down and not move. So those were the first 3 days of my trip. Like by the third day, it almost killed me, you know. And then I took an extra day off, and all of a sudden I forgotten about the ordeal, and I was ready to continue because I was only about 30 kilometers or 20 kilometers from the border. And, you know, the very idea of crossing my first border and actually making my trip a European bike trip, you know, not by the name, but actually because I've already crossed the border and I visited 2 countries.
I think that's so interesting. You talk about the 3 days because, as I say, having done something similar, after the third day is usually when the muscles fatigue starts to kick in, your legs feel like jelly. And I don't know what was your sort of training for it? Did you do much?
Well, when I got the bike, like a week before the trip, I took it for a spin. I've done like 50, and I was like, this is a great bike. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic with no weight on it or anything else. And that's it.
So very little training. And what's so funny is that, yeah, I just remember for the first 3 days, the third day was the fourth day was absolute torture. And then about the first week or two, your muscles are exhausted. They feel like jelly. But then after that, you start to get into a rhythm of your day to day, you know, getting up, cycling. I mean, your route started in Poland. Where was it sort of moving towards?
So because it still started at the end of the summertime, I figured I'd have a little bit more time to cycle through the north of Europe. So I went through the north of Poland, which is where I'm from, to the north of Germany, and then you know, I went to Amsterdam and Belgium, and so kind of like north of Europe.
Oh, nice. And as I say, through there, because for people listening, you were doing this probably during the pandemic, let's say.
Yes.
How were you sort of greeted in these places? Because people were, I don't know, in England, sometimes you get people who were still quite fearful of strangers.
You know, I would lie if I said that the pandemic did not impact my trip. It was definitely very different at the beginning, as it was the end of the summertime. And if you remember, after the first wave, the restrictions gotten loosened up a little bit. And so I was kind of on the brink of heading into the second wave. So it was still a little bit more relaxed. Like I remember being in the Netherlands, pretty much you couldn't tell that we were in the middle of a pandemic. And then there were other places that are a little bit more strict. But the more south I went and the more time passed, so, you know, September, October, I think in October I started to see the difference. And there was this tension in the air, and people were definitely getting more concerned about what was going to happen. And, you know, in the news, everyone was preparing for the second wave. And once I've gotten to Spain, which, as we all know, was pretty badly hit by the virus, it was getting into me. I was getting anxious myself. You know, I consider quitting because of pandemic. But, you know, when people tell you, well, you should avoid this or that city because they're not going to let you in, or this region is closed, it's impossible. You know, I heard this word throughout the trip a lot of times. It's impossible. You can't. Like, don't go. And at some point, I was just, you know, my plan was to go through Madrid to Portugal, either way. But I was really relieved to leave Spain at that time because of the situation. And then in Portugal, it was a little bit more relaxed when I entered. By the time I left, it's gotten really tense, you know. And this is actually the only border where I was not let into the country, the border with Spain on the Portuguese side. I remember just seeing, because for the most part, there was no one that would be checking me on the borders. I would just go into the country. There would be a little sign, the name of the place, welcome, hello, and that'll be it. No people, no, as I call it, welcoming committee. But there was one on the bridge from Portugal to Spain, and it's a natural border. There's a river, Guadiana River, and so the policeman, he asked me for my documents, and he asked me, what am I doing? Where am I going? And, here I am standing with my bike, my panniers filled up to the brim, and I say, well, I'm going home. And he looks at me in sheer surprise, and he's like, in a broken English, he says to me, bike no possible. And, I tried to like convince him and kind of tell him like, what am I going to do? I'm on this bike trip. Like, please let me in. I'm just like on my own, my camp, like, who cares? But, he's like, I can't let you in. Like, you have to go back. It's not possible. And so I lock eyes with him and I say, everything is possible. And I cycle away. So I cycle away and I'm pissed, I'm like, God damn it, like, they didn't let me in, what am I gonna do? And my mom's words come to my mind. And my mom used to tell me that if they're not letting you in through the doors, try the window. And so I tried the window and I got in.
Well, you swam across the river?
No, it's a funny story because it's such an empty area, beautiful, almost like from a Tolkien story, green hills and beautiful lakes. Well, lakes, parts of the river really, because it's a very winding a river and quite hilly, and there's almost like no one around in the area. And so I had to cycle another 100 kilometers to find another bridge. Like for me, I was just thinking, there's no way that there's nothing between on this stretch of 100 kilometers. But it's an empty area. It's a beautiful area, and there wasn't anything in between. And so I spent the night on the Portuguese side, and I decided to try Spain next day. And next day, I was on this main road, and as I'm cycling to the side, I see this sign, and it says España, like 20 kilometers or 15 kilometers. And there's another sign right next to it, border closed. And I'm thinking, and I'm looking at the map, and there's only one road that takes you to Spain, and everything else is like, kind of river terrain or hills or whatever. Like there isn't anything around there, right? So I'm thinking I'm either going to waste my time and like go 15 kilometers and like come back with nothing, or I somehow am going to manage to cross the border. And so I take the risk, I take the risk, I go, and I remember just going down the hill and analyzing the situation, okay? So it's a small village, probably like 15, 20 houses around. I see the bridge on the bottom of the hill, or on the bottom of the valley. And the village is so small that I know there isn't even any church. So there's certainly not a police station there, right? So like, this is what I'm thinking. Like, this is a criminal thinking right here. And on the side of, in the corner of my eye, I see like an older man. And obviously he's giving me a look because, I look ridiculous. Okay, let's face it. I have 4 panniers on me. I have my mattress and my stuff just packed in the back of the, sorry. I have stuff like packed in the back of the bike. And so there's no way that I could just go through a town and not be seen, right? And plus, I covered my eyes with like massive glasses and like a Warp of Sahara desert hat. So he's definitely looking at me, right? But I'm thinking, okay, chances are that maybe I can cross. So I go down and I start, the escape from Portugal, which you would think would be very prompt and fast, and but it's not, because I have like 30 kilograms of equipment with me, so I have to detach all of the panniers from the bike and throw them over the barricade that's on the border on the bridge, and then I have to lift up my super heavy bike and put it across as well, and then drop myself, and then reattach everything. So like it's 5 minutes of me just like dealing with this. And then I tried to run as fast as I could, which was probably about like 7 kilometers per hour because it was uphill. So it was very was like geriatric type of a escape situation. But I managed to get through. And at that point I was still very like, because I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to, do it that way. I much rather just go in without any issues. So it's not like I'm telling the story being proud of myself, but also I do consider myself to be a European citizen. I am a European citizen, so I didn't feel like this law was quite fair. And so I waited till I cycled like 5-10 kilometers away from that bridge to kind of feel like, okay, I'm in. No one's going to kick me out. I can breathe out. So that's the story with the border. And that was the only one really that was that dramatic. There was another one with Spain and France that was kind of iffy. But what ended up happening is thankfully you have the mountains there, and they don't really it's not possible to control every border. So if you want to get through, you're going to get through unless it's water, essentially.
Yeah, because that's what's sort of very interesting about Europe is that before COVID, it was all borderless. They're all France, Spain, Portugal, Holland, Germany. They're all in Schengen. So free movement is so easy. But to sort of close off borders, I can't imagine, as you say, they're erecting huge barricades or whatnot and putting in huge armed forces. So in a sense of for people who listening who might just have one big border on one side and the other, it doesn't seem like that big a deal really once you are over and into the other side. It's not like they're going to go, oh no, back to Portugal you go.
Well, not really, because then we entered into the summertime. I did have to, every so often I had to readjust my plans. So when I started, I didn't plan for it, but once I was in the south of Spain, and I was this close to Africa, I would lie if I said that I wasn't tempted to cross over. However, at the time that I was there, it was middle of February, I want to say. Everything was closed, and so I did not get to Morocco. And I think there is still a little bit of a dissatisfaction about that, because then my trip would turn into international, maybe rural trip. Who knows what would happen if I did that? But yeah, later, the closer to the summer I've gotten, the less restrictions there were, and so once I've gotten over March and April, I had no issues whatsoever. They were just like opening everything up, and everything was, pretty much back to what we might call normal.
And so you're sort of circling along the south side of Europe during the winter, going through probably Spain, France, Italy. Mm-hmm. Did you go to Italy?
Yes.
Yes. And then back and around. What would you say some of the few sort of moments that you had on that trip which really stuck with you?
Well, I'm currently in the process of writing them down in a form of a book. And I think maybe if not for the book and the part that I was writing yesterday, I would have probably told you a different story, because I have hundreds of them. But yesterday I did remember this one lady, because if you think about it, for the first part of my trip, I have been using couchsurfing. And so I've been staying with people in their houses, and I've been experiencing places and cultures through the lens of their eyes, really, and their houses. Only in the second part of the trip, I decided to go off grid and, be on my own, be wild camping. But the first part allowed me to see, people of different walks of life. I have met people who, a man who told me a story about his daughter who died at the age of 16. I had a sober alcoholic who told me about the walks that he takes as a way of healing, you might say. I had a shaman. I had a naturist. I had, 40 years old divorcees, just all kind of people. And this one lady, she was a refugee from Cuba. Her daughter was hosting me, and this lady, she didn't speak a word of English, and so I really had to work hard on my Spanish. And as I walked into their house, she tells me, her daughter tells me, my mom cried when she heard your story. And there was something so moving about the fact that she was so empathetic towards my trip, almost as if I didn't have to tell her about all the problems, the issues, the doubts, the fears that I had. And she understood it. And at some point, I stayed there for 2 nights, and at some point, her daughter went away, and so it was only me and this lady. And she told me beautiful stories about her Cuba. She told me about the country that she had to leave behind. She told me about how when she first held her daughter in her arms, she thought about how am I going to provide everything that this child needs in a country that doesn't have liberty. And she cried, holding her baby in her arms, because she knew that the future was just so shaky for this young woman. And the other moment that she told me about was when she and her daughter got on the plane and they were leaving their country. And they were, one of the few ones that managed to escape the regime. And she told me she was on the plane, and the moment the plane took off, she turns to her daughter and she whispered, "We're escaping the islands that just was almost like a prison. We escaped the prison." And here she is talking to me about all of those things, and crying her eyes out, and I'm crying along with her. And I think moments like this, and I had a few situations where it wasn't a conversation that was a sheer exchange of information. I'm doing my trip. This is my job. Like, all the small talk that really doesn't carry any deeper meaning. In this case, it was a heart-to-heart conversation, a soul-to-soul exchange. And it was just so powerful. I think moments like this make our life worthwhile, really. In moments like this, I felt alive. And the connection that I made with them was just one that will leave an impact for me, for years.
Well, and that's sort of one of the amazing things I always feel about doing this is you do meet some incredible and varied people, in a sense of just with such incredible stories. And, sometimes people find it easier to talk to a complete stranger than their own friends and family. They can sort of open up and really have heart to heart with someone, because they sort of, there's no sort of barriers to it, in a sense.
I think there's definitely something to be said about the barriers that some people have. Like, I'm a very open person, so it doesn't take a lot from me to open up and to be very vulnerable, because I find strength in that. But I know it is a little terrifying for a lot of people. In this case, with this lady, I want to say she's from the same tribe. Every so often I run into people and I'm like, this is the person from the same tribe, and there is just like a sort of almost like a magical connection between those two people. And it doesn't matter how much time you have together. You just you get right into it. You get right into the zone, and you speak from the heart. And there are no filters. There is no fear. There's just this connection,
Yeah, very, very true. And with that, I mean, we spoke before the podcast started about sort of social media. How much were you sort of what's the word? Were you posting about it on social media, or were you more or less keeping that separate or distant, should I say?
So I tried to be as open about everything as I could. For the first half of my trip, I didn't really do. There were pictures, but that'll be it. And then in the second half, I decided that I should probably write a blog, and that was a wonderful decision and a terrible one at the same time, because I'm a perfectionist, and also I'm a photographer, and so even prior to the trip, a lot of my fellow photographers would be telling me, well, like, this is such an amazing opportunity for you to get amazing pictures. And as much as this, of course, is true, it also put a burden on my shoulders where I felt like I had to live up to certain expectations. So there was a couple of weeks where I would be shooting video and pictures on my drone. I'll be shooting pictures on my heavy, bulky camera that I had with me. That was not a good idea to take it on the trip because it was just way too heavy. Then I would be doing the same thing on my phone and then putting everything together. Then I would edit everything together. Then you have to put everything in, you have to put together the movies. You have to add music. Then you have to tell the story. So already as I'm explaining all the elements of the blog, which, the first few was spectacular. I have GIFs and I have everything, but it took so much work. And all the time I had to stop, and I had to, if there was a beautiful sight, I had to take all of my 3 devices and I had to record and take pictures on all the 3 of them, right? So I had different points of views, and I had stuff for the blog, but I also had the stuff for Instagram. And so it all of a sudden, this 1 year of a break, 6 months of a break, or however long it was going to be, it became a part-time job, to run the blog, and also a blog that I was not financially, benefiting from. And it all stopped when my drone decided to fly away. I just disconnected from my phone and off it went. And then same week, the camera on my phone broke. So, I started to get all those little innuendos that, oh, maybe you're just looking through this beautiful world through the lens of your devices instead of doing it with your own damn eyes, So that was the moment where I decided, hey, I have to, I can still continue doing the blog, but it must change. I must sacrifice this need that I have for perfectionism, and I have to let go of something. Something has to go.
Yeah, it's very true. It's sometimes the curse of people wanting to know what's going on and people wanting to see your story firsthand almost becomes a burden to what you can experience. While you're writing a blog, you could very easily be having a cup of coffee and speaking to the locals about some story. And your story is very, very relatable. Going on one of my trips, it was very much, drone, another camera, GoPro, whatever. And, editing, and you spend your whole life almost consumed by getting the content, getting the perfect shot. And it detracts from the actual experience of just being present in what is going on in whatever you're doing, wherever you are, to have that sort of time not to worry about, I don't know how many likes, or not that anyone really worries about that now, but, you know, whatever it may be, to really absorb yourself into the moment and cutting away from social media and cutting away from all that gives you that sort of time to really appreciate where you are.
I would say that if there was one thing that I would change about my trip, and bear in mind, I'm one of those people who like, there's a lesson in everything, and there is a lesson in everything. But if there was one thing that I could have changed, it would definitely be cutting off social media entirely, not having a contact with anybody, like just go off the grid completely.
Why do you say that?
Because I think I see social media mainly as a distraction. It's a beautiful tool of, you know, connecting people, but in my case, I know that I was using it as a distraction, and I would be checking things all the time. I would get very jittery about it, and it was the trip that I've taken was taken for a very specific reason, you know, as it turned out later. I wanted to have time with myself. I wanted to understand something about myself. There's nothing I'm going to understand about myself through looking at silly pictures on the internet. No message, no matter how deep the caption is, because there's also like quality content online, of course, but nothing is going to tell me more than I already know. It just, I have to dig through layers of things to get to the most authentic version of myself. And in order to do that, I do have to disconnect from everything around me. And a lot of times that also includes other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why in the second half of my trip, I said to myself, I have to be out in nature. Like, I have to experience that not taking a shower for a week. Like, otherwise it's not going to be a true adventure. Like, I have to get out of my comfort zone and do it in a major way.
And so cutting off social media and most contact was the way that you sort of thought about doing that? No,
it wasn't, but it should have been. It should have been. You know, some of the lessons, you got to give yourself some break. Some of the lessons I've only learned after I've returned. And so I was aware that this area of my life is problematic, but at the time, because I've already was putting out the message, and then I was getting closer to home, so people were getting excited. So I did continue it. But now, a couple of weeks after I've returned, I'm definitely, my whole relationship to social media has changed and evolved, and I look at it very differently.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken beforehand about it in a sense of, you know, on one of my trips where you're showing these incredibly beautiful pictures, it doesn't tell the real story of what's going on in your head or what's going on in your day to day. And sometimes what you see and the reality, I mean, I feel like a broken record when I say this because everyone already knows it, but it's quite nice when you sort of come to a point and looking at social media and know that, you know, they're just a picture, they're just a video, and they're very, very small snippets, very small, of someone's life. They're not someone's actual life. No one lives at 100 miles an hour all the time. Absolutely.
The highlights for sure, but also I kind of think it's a human nature to look at those pictures, to see those, you know, idealized version of ourselves or other people, our friends, family, and just, you know, we already have this tendency to look at the end product, right? She's done this trip, he climbed this mountain. You don't think about the journey at all. You think about the final product of it. and it's just magnified, in on social media. And I I think I'm coming to terms with the fact, I'm coming to realization that it might not be that awareness of it is going to help us in any way. I think I'm coming to realization that only like cutting it out of your life entirely might be the solution. Otherwise, subconsciously there might be some things that are happening that you might not even be aware of. But I don't know. That's my little theory right here.
No, I think you're right. Well, it was quite funny. We had Ava Zubek on last year. And she, of course, shows the best parts. She has videos and everything. And so she thought, I should probably show the reality of what goes on. And so started putting up pictures of the real reality. And of course, got a lot of flack because I was like, I don't want to see this. I don't want to see, bad things. Why do I want to see this? And it's weird. It's like human nature they don't want the real story. They want the highlights reel. They want the best bits.
Well, because if you think about it, if you have two people, right, and one is authentic and shows, everything, and the other person shows only the good thing, you're not going to assume that the pretty picture is, under the pretty picture are other things. You're just going to assume that there is a pretty picture and that's it. You're not going to dig into the story. So I think that's why it's kind of like this cotton candy is always popping at us and grabbing our attention, and it's just something that looks more appealing in a way.
What do you think the sort of side effects that you got from sort of dopamine depletion, let's say, as I was trying to sort of describe it earlier, the idea of just consuming so much that eventually you just lose all, what's the word? You lose all sort of inspiration. You lose so much by just constantly scrolling. That's one thing I've certainly noticed happening is when you go a lot on social media and see, you sort of just get lazy, which is a weird psychological thing. You wouldn't think that scrolling causes you to suddenly just drift or whatnot.
I think there's a lot to unpack here. And where do I start? I'll start from the most important from my point of view. So I believe that when we look at other people and we consume lives of other people, we forget to listen to ourselves, right? So social media is a massive distraction tool. We're already not encouraged to sit down and be with our thoughts. We constantly hit by different stimuli, TV, radio, music, Spotify, Instagram, just overloaded with information. And I've noticed, because I went off of social media for a month lately, and I just have noticed a massive increase in my ability to focus and my productivity, and just the way life feels, something shifted so majorly that I thought to myself, well, I'm not coming back. There's just no point. And only when there's so much noise around, but only when you clear that noise away, you can hear what your needs are, right? I do a lot of talks with youth. You never have the opportunity to actually listen to your own needs. And I do talks with young people, people 16, 17 years old. And I always try to kind of really hone in this message of, look, if you're going to go on social media, you're probably going to find a lot of beautiful dreams, a lot of beautiful adventures, a lot of beautiful challenges. But they're likely not to be yours. I'm not coming to their schools to tell them, look, you have to do this bike trip. This is not the point at all. The point is to encourage them to find their own version of something that makes their heart, pump a little faster, and brings them joy and happiness. And so I feel like the social media is really this disease of our society that doesn't allow anyone to tap into their inner knowledge. I know it sounds a little, hippie to say that you have to listen to your own voice, but I had moments in my life that that voice was just so clear and so strong. And I am the most, spiritually rich that I have ever been. And I try to avoid the word happy because it's really, I don't think, misunderstood and misused. Spiritually rich is going to be my version of happy. But I think it is primarily because I had this opportunity to really get to know myself, and yeah, social media is just not helping with any of that.
I think that's so true with some of these adventures. It's more about sort of learning about yourself and how you are. As I say, a lot of the time you see these, when you go out, you leave as this person and then you come back as a completely different person, more sort of clear-minded, more sort of aware of certain things. And, there's many ways you can do that, but sometimes having that space with your thoughts and cycling every day for 10 hours, 8 hours a day, you have a lot of time with your thoughts, and it sort of gets you more, I'd say, more clear-minded, or whatever's hiding behind there certainly comes crawling to the surface quite quickly.
Absolutely, and that's definitely my experience with the bike trip. I think, one of the changes that I see in my life is, well, I think all the changes that happened were changes that were unexpected. There are certain things that you just know that are going to happen, such as, you're probably going to build your self-confidence. You're probably going to be stronger physically and mentally. But I think a few things that I didn't expect to be a part of the equation was, for instance, me learning to appreciate and value softness. I think we live in a society that really pushes hard and always tries to get, us to things that are bigger and stronger and go for longer and more exciting things. But for me, it was a reverse of a lesson, because I needed to actually say sometimes, you know what, I don't need to argue with this person. I don't need to prove my point. I don't need to do anything for other people. All I need to care about is this idea of, I call it social egoism. I need to take care of my own self, and if I'm good, then I can spread, the goodness out there to the world. But first and foremost, it will always have to be me. And it's not narcissistic or egoistic, really. It's realistic. If you want to live a happy life, quote unquote happy, you have to take care of yourself. And so I started to cherish my soft spots, me being delicate with people. Something happened to me creatively. I'm an artist. I take pictures, I make movies, and I kind of felt very comfortable in that zone. That was something that I had a degree to prove my, abilities for, and kind of anything outside of that was just not my domain. And once I started to overcome physical feats, like I proved to myself that I can go over this hill. I can prove to myself that I can go longer than, I did before, or faster than I did before. It had a reflection in the way that I started to feel about my abilities as an artist, as a human being. And so throughout the trip, I kind of wrestled with the idea of writing a book. And at first, it was this little tiny seed of a book for children. And then it's germinated into this idea of a novel. And now, I almost have finished a book that's more of a I don't know, a bio and a bike trip a reference point. I don't even know how to call it, but it's, it's a story of my life, really, and the story of what happened in the past year. And yeah, this trip just creatively changed so much because I started to go out of my comfort zones. I started to think that I don't need to have a certification to validate my abilities. I don't need anyone to tell me that I have to do this thing and that or a different way. Like I can actually make decisions for my own. So those are the most amazing lessons from the trip. And my favorite part about it is that it's a tree that keeps giving. And so I stopped the physical movement, but mentally I'm still going back and forth. I'm still learning and relearning and realizing certain things that happen. And as I write about them, I get a better understanding as well. So it's definitely the best thing that I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, it's so true. You find that sometimes the small things that trigger you, in a sense, suddenly become, you're just like, why would I worry about that? Your sort of grounding in your understanding, your process, your thought process is so much clearer that all the rest is just noise.
Absolutely. And I think there's just nothing that can give you that than spending a little bit of time on your own. Like I'm really such a huge fan, and I just tell everyone it's so wonderful to be okay on your own for even a couple of days. It makes all the difference.
Very true. And so, finishing the trip, you went round to Italy. Just for people, you went round to Italy, then Slovenia.
Yes, Slovenia. I also in Italy. I went to Sicily, so I did cycle around the island as well. And then the initial plan was to go over to Greece, and then I wanted to go through Balkans back to Poland. But then things changed because I found a furry friend that just turned everything upside down.
Where did you find this furry friend?
Furry friend was on the side of a very busy road in the south of Italy, quite close to Sicily, to just give people a point of reference.
And furry friend being a feline, a little cat.
Yes, a little cat. I was just riding. It was the end of the day, and in the corner of my eye, I see something black in the grass, and I remember just stopping the bike and just putting it on the side, and I literally said it out loud to myself. Like I said, this is a part of the story where I find a cat and I take it back home with me to Poland, and that's exactly what happened.
God, how amazing. And so what is that, how the sort of story changed? Was you had this cat and then it was you cycling back home with the cat?
So it was a little bit more complicated than that because believe it or not, but I was not prepared for traveling with a furry fellow. And so I did have to adjust the bike a little bit. And the cat it's called wounded. There was something wrong with the tail. I couldn't tell at the time because it was just like all blood and scabs, and it looked very nasty. And the cat was obviously underfed and not in a great condition. And so I took him to the vet, and the vet told me that the cat needs antibiotics. The cat needs antibiotics, and the antibiotics need to be refrigerated. And so, here I am in south of Italy. The weather is like pretty much almost 40 degrees every day, and they tell me that the drug has to be refrigerated. I'm like, I just have to stop somewhere, and so I did. I made a lot of friends in south of Italy. South of Italy was probably one of the most favorite places on the trip. So I went to this amazing eco farm where I stayed for 2 weeks with a cat, and the cat, I fattened it up a little bit, and I kept giving it the medicine, and so it's gotten a little bit better, and I got myself prepared better for traveling with the cat. And yeah, once I've gotten on the bike with the cat, um, I knew that it wasn't a perfect place for a cat to be on. The cat agreed. It did not like being on the bike. First 3 days were terrible, to the point that I was just kind of questioning everything myself. It's a funny thing, but I'm a vegan, and so I was just feeling so guilty, and like so guilty of like abusing animals. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm taking this little creature, and what am I doing? But at some point, the cat got used to being on the bike. I had a little net over the basket that I've gotten for him or her. It's a non-binary cat. It's a female biologically, I guess, but it has a male name. Kind of how it goes with me. And so the cat got used to being on the bike. For the most part, it would be covered, under layers and layers of very comfortable sweater. I gave him my favorite sweater. This is the sign of love here. And so the cat was in a basket, and I was just like, I'm going home. At this point, I had probably a little over 3,000 kilometers to go, and I did not do any sightseeing along the way. I was just very focused on returning home, and the weather was going at that point as well. It was the end of summer, which was still beautiful in the south of Italy, but I knew damn well that the summer will end very fast in Poland, and so I was trying to get home really fast. So within very short span of time, I did kind of swoosh through a lot of countries.
So sort of once the sort of trip sort of took a massive change of direction of just trying to get home as quickly as possible.
Yes, and as I said, because the cat didn't have the papers, the cat needed more papers than I did. The cat needed a vaccination, a trip, and the passport or something. And it would just take too much time, and I didn't want to waste time. And so, I was already half criminal, so I'm like, I might as well try to smuggle the cat through the borders, Because on the ferry, they would most certainly check, and they would most certainly hear, because the little fellow is not one of the quietest ones. It has a very southern temperament, and it lets people know that he's here. So I did kind of, I flipped my trip. I had to adjust, which wasn't the first time that I needed to adjust my trip, and I just went with the flow.
Well, it just seems like absolutely incredible, this sort of trip taking you all over the place. I mean, a whirlwind of emotions and experiences you've had. It's just been absolutely amazing to sort of listen to.
Well,
there's a...
Yeah,
Sorry.
go on.
No. What were you going to say?
Oh, it's just very heartwarming to hear that kind of reaction from people who are doing it, because I'm still like waiting for someone to come up to me and say, well, she's oh gosh, what's the word? I'm forgetting it, but like, you're fake, like you're not doing it, Yeah, I'm still waiting for someone to be like, point it out for me, like your trip wasn't real, because I don't have it in my resume. I've never done anything like that before. And not that I care that much what people are going to say, but I do care what you think, because you're legit. So like people who actually, because you have so many people who think that they know more, I just saw this picture online the other day of like two people pointing fingers at this other human just sitting down on the street. And you have kind of like the scan of their brains, right? And the one sitting that's being laughed at, his brain is like nice and big, right? And the two that are making fun of him, they have little brains, right? And it's kind of, it happens so often that someone who has no credibility, no knowledge to criticize you is going to be the first in line to tell you that you're doing something wrong. And so, if I have someone who actually has the experience and ability to criticize me and to tell me like, oh, this was cool or this wasn't cool, then, I'm going to take your compliment in and I'm going to bathe in it a little bit.
I think people, though, it's human psychology is like, you'll hear 1,000 times people go, wow, what you did is incredible. But if you have one person, no matter what background they have, if they've said, "Oh, you're fake," you will listen to that. And it's annoying, but that is sort of human psychology. And what you've got to do is slightly drown out those people because, as I say, it's amazing what people do on sort of online when they know there's very little repercussions of it happening. I remember on one of my trips, at the end, I decided to be very open and honest about my feelings towards it. And some guy decided to write, "Good, I'm glad you suffered. You deserved it." And I was like, "Oh, what a dick." But and out of like the entire trip where people have been really nice and complimentary, that's the one that sort of I remember, and that's terrible. But that unfortunately is human psychology. And once you sort of learn, I mean, it's easier said than done, to sort of forget about that sort and just move on. It's people just like to do it.
Imposter is the word that I was looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a part of the show where we ask the same 5 questions to each guest each week. With the first being, what's the one gadget that you bought that you always take with you on your trips and adventures?
Well, I suppose the bike wouldn't count as one. If it does, then that would definitely be the bike. But except for the bike, for me, it's always the journal. It's just, so many times I go through the notes that I have taken, entries that I've written, and I just get so into the story that I'm telling because I like to tell stories with a lot of details. And so when I write them down and when I go back to them, there's just no way in hell that I will be able to remember all those details. So for me, it's just, and also I think something happens, like maybe there's a connection from the head to the hand, or from the heart to the hand that doesn't involve the head, that sometimes I just don't think about what I'm writing and the most beautiful things come out of it. And it's just, I'm not doing it for anybody else. It's just like my notes. So it's very personal. It's something that I value tremendously.
Nice. What about your favorite adventure or travel book?
So I have one that I've been obsessed about for years now. It's Cheryl Strait, Wild. There was a movie made out of it. It's about this lady who goes on a PCT, Pacific Crest Trail in the States, and she does it after her mom had died, and it's a very personal story. It's a story that's packed with the past. It's frankly the best inspiration that I can get from my book, because unlike any other travel book, well, maybe not any, but certainly out of the ones that I have read, is the one that just stands out among everything else, because it's not just, oh, I did this and I went there, and it's just, just telling things as it is. She goes into depth to explore the emotions that were driving her at the time. She connects it with the past, and she kind of thinks about the future. So it's just intertwined in such a beautiful way that for me, it's like a full dimensional story of a human being that's a human being who's being very vulnerable and very honest also about the mistakes that they've done in the past, and the person, camera, and a person who takes themselves with a little bit of a, they're not too serious. They can make fun of themselves. And I really appreciate that. And I have the self-appreciating type of humor as well. And I kind of like to make fun of myself. I don't like the life to be too serious. And I really very much admire that in her work.
Very true. Why are these adventures important? Why are adventures important?
I really hope for most of the people, they're not doing it to show off. They're not doing it to just post a nice picture like I was here, and not feel the place, not truly be in the place. I really hope the trip is almost like this embodiment of a symbolic life journey that we take on. And so I see it as a tool of self-understanding. And I think they're very special because you go in with the mindset of a beginner, right? Which is so hard to get in our regular day-to-day life. And so I really think that we are so lucky to have this opportunity and have that option for us, because it never grows old, it never goes away. And for all the people who are like thinking about doing something major, something that might change your life, the beautiful thing about it is you don't have to go on a 13-month long bike expedition. You can just take some time off work. And I think a week is like a decent amount of time. It's possible for you to get that time off of work. If you are to fully support yourself financially during that week, even if it means eating only oats and bananas and peanut butter, as I did, it's financially doable. If you want to, you should camp. I would recommend people to go and camp for that week. And you can even like borrow the camping gear from anybody that you know. You can borrow it from REI or Decathlon and then return it a week later. You didn't hear that advice from me, by the way. And just spending time with your own self in the middle of wilderness can be just so transformational. And I think that's the beauty, that's the juice of taking the trips, of taking the time off, of taking the time for yourself, and really disconnecting. I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, very true. What is your favorite quote?
I've written three. I've written three because I don't know. They're just different people, very different people, but talking about a very similar thing, and I thought it was quite interesting. The first one is from the book Wild, and let me read it so I won't butcher it for the listeners. It goes, I walked until walking became unbearable, until I believed I couldn't walk even one more step. And then I run. And I love this quote because it really speaks to this idea. I don't know if you're familiar with David Goggins, but I'm a big fan, and I love his 40% rule, in which he claims that when you think you reach your full capacity, you only at 40% of you can really do. And I think Cheryl really talks about the same thing, but in a more poetic way. There's just so many layers of your capabilities, of your potential, that we still haven't even tapped into. And it's almost like the beautiful thing about it is that it's unlimited. There's no way that you're going to get to the end of it and you're going to be done. Like, as you evolve as a human being, there's always going to be more that is kind of hiding somewhere in the bottom of your heart, soul, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, you always have more to give. That's why I love this quote. The second one is from the one and only Carl Jung. People would do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Love this quote because I love the guy who kind of marries psychology with spirituality. So when I quote him, I feel a little bit more validated, I guess. But, the guy is really all about exploring your shadow. So not only talking about the good, beautiful sides, but what goes on in the deepest depth of your psyche, the darkest sides of it. Like, let's explore that. Let's see what's in there. It's scary, but once you dig deep enough to get to those parts, your life is going to be transformed, because it's like in a Matrix, you're finally going to wake up and you're going to be able to maybe sometimes face a very uncomfortable truth, but it's the truth nevertheless. So obviously, which pill you're gonna take. For me, there's no question. I'm gonna go for the reality check, for the slap from the universe, and yeah, I want to know it all, and that's why I love this book. And the third one, just to close out with something strong, David Goggins. You are in danger of living life so comfortable and soft that you will die without ever realizing your true potential. And it just, this quote gives me chills. It's just so powerful. And it speaks to the idea of embracing the discomfort, embracing the discomfort, and really encourages you not to miss out on your suffering. In the sense that, I'm from a household that's been problematic. My dad has been an alcoholic. He's sober now. He's been sober for about 10 years. And so I carry this heaviness, this kind of a burden that I put on my back. That has been put on my back when I was a child. And the way I think about it, those difficult things, it's almost like carrying a backpack filled with heavy stones, right? And you carry it throughout all of your life, and you're like running this distance, and it's so hard because you're carrying this backpack, right? And it's just like, you think it's unfair because you have this load, this burden to carry. But think about the moment you take this off. Like, not only don't have anything on your shoulders anymore, but think about the strength, the mental strength, the spiritual strength that you've gained through the suffering that you now have, and you're at advantage now. So it kind of it flips the suffering, and just to kind of make it clear, no trauma is okay. Period. But I think you can choose to see the negative things in a positive light, and it can really transform your life. And if you start to think that way about your life, and if you start to think about the unlimited potential that you might have, then you're just going to start to enjoy that suffering, that discomfort. Like, there's just so much information about your own self in that suffering. There's just so much worth and value in it. So I really, again, try to always hone in this idea of embrace discomfort. It's your best friend. Embrace failure. Those are all the things that are there for us to let us know about something that I need to work on, or I need to let go of.
Yeah, very true. I think sometimes with these trips, you discover so much about yourself and the sort of possibilities of how far your potential, your mind, your body can actually go. Sometimes it can be quite scary to actually realize how far. But you suddenly, once you break out of that sort of comfort zone, you do sort of experience so much more. What about people listening are always keen to get started and maybe go on like one of these grand adventures? What's the one thing you would recommend to them to get started?
As I said, taking a long ass trail, getting a tent, and just being out there for a week. Just be out there. Like, a week is such a wonderful kind of testing ground, because even if you're not going to eat, like, you're not going to die in a week, even if it's going to be like quite extreme, like, nothing major is likely to happen. It might happen, but like, it's pretty safe to go on a week without anyone. And I guarantee you're gonna learn so much about your own self, and that you're gonna learn more about your own self in that week that you would have learned in the past, 5. Like, there's just something about quieting that outside noise that changes everything. And it's also a good way of testing how you're going to feel if you're not going to take a shower for a week. I don't know if everybody wants to go that extreme, but I think there is a beauty in simplicity. And I think there is a beauty of having everything you need with you, and not living in a house that, you only use 10% off because it's just too damn big, not having all of the devices, expensive devices that you worry about losing, and not having to impress anyone and look a certain way because you're just in the middle of nowhere. There's just so much value in that I think it's a shame that more people are not using that opportunity.
Very true. And finally, what are you doing now, and how can people follow you in the future?
So I would love people to either find me on my website. Again, I'm trying to not use my social media as much, but it doesn't mean that I'm completely unreachable. So I'm there every so often. It's just on my terms. So I'm there and I post every so often. And currently, I'm facing, I think, the biggest challenge so far in my life. So writing my life story, talking about the difficult things that happened in childhood, talking about being away from home for 6 years and what does that feel and what does that do to you. And I connect everything, or I try to connect everything with the kind of the skeleton of a trip, because this is kind of how it felt to me going on the trip. I've gotten a lot of flashbacks from the past, connected with what I want to happen in the future, and I put it in a hopefully slightly funny story that's not that serious, but I really, my goal is to like create this work that will really encourage other people to be vulnerable, because as I said before, I see so much strength in sharing your own story. And even though it might be so uncomfortable for a lot of people, it's just so powerful, and just there's no question about it. There's no denying it. So yeah, that's and I'm a proud cat mama now. Do you want to see Frederick?
Yeah, go on. Let's see Frederick.
Oh, oh, yeah, there he is. My black prince.
For people listening, it's a sweet black cat.
Hey. He's just sleeping. He doesn't do anything. He just sleeps. Every so often he wakes up, and then he's a menace. Like, he runs around, jumps at everything, and my mom has to hide every flower in the house because he's gonna get to it. So he, as I said, he has a very Saturn temperament. Okay, keep going. There we go.
And what's the sort of motto that you sort of live by now?
You gotta risk it to get the biscuit. That's one of my favorite lines. It's ridiculous, but I love it. But yeah, I'm really, I think I'm in a very interesting time of my life where I'm still living off my savings. I'm going to be very honest about it, because I want to walk the talk. Okay, so when I say, "Oh, listen to your intuition," like, risk your life and be courageous, I'm not just saying it for the sake of it. I am putting my ass on the line, because I just decided, I had this moment where I was very certain that I'm hearing the same voice that spoke to me in that shower scene. And it said, "Write a book." And I don't really know where this is going to take me. And it's like, isn't it exciting? And isn't it beautiful to not know and not to be certain, and just to trust your gut and like go all the way in, even if it means that you're going to lose all of your savings. Money is just the money, But for me, a life that's filled with purpose, what a blessed life to have.
And so what is next?
What is next? Like, for me, is definitely finishing the book. And honestly, I would lie if I said I haven't thought about anything else, because it's kind of like, once you experience this feeling of freedom, it's so invigorating that you want to continue it. You want to check out more things and see what's out there. But also, for me, the major lesson is I have uncovered something in me that I get the same high, and I'm talking about like a real high from going to the forest that I would get from being on a trip. TMI, but this past New Year's Eve, I took something for the first time in my life. I'm like, okay, I'm nearly 31. I can finally try something, and it was in a very safe environment. It was an MDMA, okay. And here I am with like on the bed with my best friend, and he's like my soulmate, and I love him to death. And we're laying down and we're feeling, the feeling, and it comes over, and tears come out of my eyes, and I hold his hand, and he's like, "How is it? How is it?" And I say to him, "This is how I normally feel," and he's just like cracking up because like I don't know what it is. I don't know if other people experience it, and I don't have it all the time. But there are some moments where I'm getting high of life, and I don't really have much. I don't. It doesn't matter what the weather is like. It doesn't really matter what's kind of happening. But like every so often, like I go to the forest and it hits me, and it hits me in nature. It doesn't. I don't think it hits me anywhere else, but it hits me in nature. Like I think my body clicks with whatever is happening with those pine trees in the forest.
Well, Ola, it's been such a pleasure listening to your stories, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on today.
It's been such a pleasure, and you have the gift of listening, which I should probably learn from you. And it's
no, sorry, you go.
No, it's been wonderful because also, all my friends from America that I'm saying hello to right now are going to be very excited that they will finally have an interview that they can understand, because every coverage of my trip has been in this indecipherable Polish, and finally now they can understand.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
What a pleasure.